Hey, it's Red Podcast. No episode number on this one because I've got a big announcement. I'm changing some things up. Red Podcast is getting a rebrand.
This is the Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for influencers. Here's your host, David Hooper.
Who?
David Hooper.
Who?
David Hooper.
2 years ago, I started what I'm calling Red Podcast 2.0. Red Podcast 1.0, that's how this show started. Used to be co-hosted. Red stood for Real Entrepreneur Development. And about a year in, it got to where that it wasn't really a match for me or for my co-host Laurel. We decided to go our separate ways. And you can see with my background in the music business, my background building influence, building audiences, and her background working in the coaching business, helping coaches with their marketing, that the two of us together on one podcast, not a perfect match. It wasn't a bad match, but it wasn't the drilled down audience building podcast that I wanted to do. And it wasn't the drilled down coaching and coaching business podcast that she wanted to do. So a couple of years ago, I started what I called Red 2.0, and that is when Red Podcast became known as the marketing podcast for influencers. Fast forward to today, couple of problems. The word influencer, it's a tricky word. Most influencers, they don't consider themselves influencers. The reason I picked that word is because I needed a word to talk about bloggers, podcasters, speakers, authors, people who had influence and had ideas and messages to spread, and they were spreading those ideas in different ways. I wanted one word, not thought leader, for all of them. So influencer was the word that I picked. And like entrepreneur, most entrepreneurs, they don't call themselves entrepreneurs. The true entrepreneurs, they don't call themselves that. True influencers, they don't call themselves that. Here's problem number 2, and this has recently happened over the last few months. Social media has blown up. It is now real media. Instagram is considered real media. YouTube, real media. So what a lot of people are referring to as influencers, it could be somebody with nothing more than a popular Instagram account. Kim Kardashian posts a bunch of selfies on her Instagram account. She's considered an influencer. There's a guy named Nash Greer. If you're not familiar with him, I'll have him linked in the episode notes. Go to Red Podcast for those. Nash Greer got his start doing Vine videos. Just a few seconds long. Kids loved him. Brands loved him. Paying this guy $25,000 to $50,000 per mention of their products within his little Vine videos. They consider him an influencer. And that's not who I work with. I could, but I left the entertainment industry. I left the music industry so I could work with bloggers, podcasters, authors, people with a message that I felt was making the world better, not just an entertainment message. So basically, my term got hacked. Beyond that, I tried to come up with one word for all the people that I wanted to reach. Didn't like thought leader, didn't like mediapreneur, bloggers, podcasters, authors. You've heard me refer to the trifecta of influence: print, broadcast, live speeches. I could have been clearer about that. So here's the big announcement. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be making some changes to the Red branding. Some of them have already happened. Some of them are to come. This podcast is going to have the same personality. It's going to have the same feel, but there's going to be a lot more focus, greater emphasis on what I call renegades. These are people who don't fit the status quo. They're not trying to go get venture capital. They're doing things on their own. And they also work with greater than the average intensity. Some of these renegades are doing what I call shadow businesses. If you've heard Red Podcast episode 212, for example, that's at redpodcast.com/212 if you do want to hear this. I had an interview with a high-end escort. Now, that might not seem that it's a match for your business, but here's why it is. You don't like your clients? Well, what happens when your client is in bed with you and you're naked? How do you handle that? Don't like the feedback that you're getting on your book? Taking it too personally? Well, what do you do when all the feedback is about you and how you look and about the most intimate things that you could imagine? Somebody who's in situations like those has good advice for somebody like you and somebody like me. The feedback we get, not that personal, so it's not that bad. If we can learn from somebody doing something a lot more intense, that's good for us. What do you do when family and friends don't like your job? What do you do when society has judgments about what you love to do for a living? There are a lot of lessons from those entrepreneurs running shadow businesses. And the rebrand that I'm doing, that's going to help me to attract more of those people to interview. It's also going to help me to attract the right type of listener for this content. There are a lot of topics that I cover on here. You're not going to see them covered elsewhere. I'll give you an example. There are a lot of things that I will talk about that I'll be completely pragmatic about and explain exactly how they work that some people are afraid to bring up because they're afraid they're going to be judged by them. Fake reviews on Amazon. Gaming the system on podcast charts like iTunes. Some people aren't going to talk about that. I talk about that. Now, I'm not saying you should do these kind of things, but I think it's important to you to know what some of your competition is doing. I think it's important for you to have all this information laid out in front of you. You can decide whether it's for you or not. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to give you advice, maybe, but I'm also here to show you what is possible. You can judge things and make the decisions for yourself. Red, at its core, is an audience-building podcast. Red. Reach, expand, develop your audience. That's what this podcast is about. My goal for you is for you to be able to release a product and have people waiting for it. You're selling your version of the iPhone, and you've got people outside your store that got there the day before and are camping out. That's what I want for you, and I can help you do that. That's what I've done in the music industry. That's what I've done in the film industry. That's what I've done in the book industry. And I can help you do the same thing. There's going to be a greater emphasis on podcasting. I'm working through a final edit of my new book. It's about podcast marketing. And because of this, I've been doing a lot of podcast-specific things, a lot of research, a lot of writing on it, a lot of testing with other podcasts that I'm involved with. I'm going to share those with you. Obviously, I believe in this. That's why I'm writing a book on it. But beyond the book, there's a real opportunity with podcasting right now. I think it's important for you, if you're marketing yourself via your personality, podcasting is the tool. More and more people are learning what podcasting is every day. Equipment to podcast is easier to use. It's cheaper than it's ever been. It's more powerful than it's ever been. Podcasts are also easier for people to consume. iPhone made it easy. Android made it easy. But now we've got podcasting in cars. We've got podcasting in locations that we never could have imagined even just a couple of years ago. Podcasting is your opportunity to market yourself via your personality. Podcasting is your opportunity to be like Apple, where you throw your message out there, people connect with it, and they're just waiting to interact with you. I'm going to help you do that. Now, as far as the rebranding of Red Podcast, I'm bringing you along for the journey. This is something that I feel adamant about because you need to see how this is really done. I don't want to throw out the finished product and say, yeah, look at me. I'm going to show you exactly what this looks like. This is why the very first episodes of Red, there are 150 of them. They're at redpodcast.com. This is why those are still up there. This is why the Red Podcast 2.0, the marketing podcast for influencers, that will remain. It's not bad information. It's good information. but the way I've been targeting people to find it hasn't been as good as it could have been. So that's Red Podcast 3.0. That's happening over the next few weeks. You'll see some little things right now. You'll see some little things coming up. And there are probably some things that you're not going to notice. Little bitty tweaks that I'm making. If you notice something has changed on the website, if you hear something that's changed in the podcast, reach out to me at David Hooper on Twitter is how to do that. Beyond the podcast, I've got a free newsletter that you're going to love. I'm working on a manifesto now. If you're interested, to make sure that you don't miss it, redpodcast.com. Sign up for it. Next episode, back with marketing lessons. You know, back in the early 90s, I was a freshman in college studying commercial music at the University of Memphis, and I had a side business placing tiny classified ads in magazines like the National Enquirer. Some people might refer to this as a chain letter. Had pretty good success. The post office actually shut me down. That story and lessons that you can learn from the chain letter on the next episode of Red Podcast. If you want to make sure you don't miss it, redpodcast.com, top left corner. One click is all it takes for you to get this podcast delivered however you want it. I've got an Android app. I've got an iPhone app. You listen via Apple Podcasts, Google Play. One click is all it takes to subscribe. If you've got questions, you've got comments, reach out to me at David Hooper on Twitter. Thank you so much for sticking things out with me for the last 3 years with Red Podcast. We've got big things coming up. You're going to love them to help you reach, expand, and develop your audience, to sell your influence and spread your message. That's coming up. I'll see you on the next episode.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for influencers. Never miss an episode. Subscribe now with your iPhone, Android, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.